Hello, and welcome to the Personality Junkie Podcast. I'm AJ Drenth.
And I'm Elaine Shallock.
Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is judging and perceiving. But before we do so, I just wanted to thank Elaine for taking a short break from her incessant Olympic viewing. I'm not sure if you knew this about Elaine, but she's a huge fan of all things Olympics, and so
it's the perceiver in me.
It's the perceiver in you. Perfect. That's perfect tie-in to our topic today. But I just wanted to thank Elaine for taking a couple hours away from the what is it the double luge right now. So anyhow, like as I was saying, the JP topic is near and dear to my heart. It's probably something that I've written about more than anything else in my many years of personality blogging. But the first thing I wanted to say is just kind of give a brief background of our podcast history, which is we're now on our third podcast. We began with an intro to the functions and talked about why we at Personality Junkie are such advocates of knowing and understanding the functions of your personality type. And in the second podcast, we moved on to talk about extroverts and introverts and various topics related to that. So today we're moving on. We're kind of skipping over SNN and TNF, I guess, and moving on to J and P. But we'll eventually tail back and address those as well. But one thing that's important to kind of start off with, I think, as far as judging and perceiving is concerned, is that Carl Jung did not even use the terminology of judging and perceiving in his original framework. Instead, he used the terms irrational and rational functions. And today, the term irrational has a little bit of a negative connotation, but that wasn't really the way in which Jung understood it. He had something similar in mind, I think, to judging and what we know about judging and perceiving, which was actually introduced by Myers-Briggs. And so why don't we start off and kind of talk about the Myers-Briggs conception of J and P and kind of what your understanding of that is, Elaine.
Okay, well, the Myers-Briggs interpretation of judging and perceiving, it concretizes the function that you extrovert first. So in the case of those who use thinking and feeling and extrovert that first, that would be characterized as a judging trait or a judging function. And in the case of those who extrovert their perceiving function first, either sensing or intuition, that's the perceiving trait. And so determining whether you're a judge or a perceiver is a matter of determining which of those you actually extrovert first, not necessarily what is the first or dominant preference or function in your stack.
Right. So it really goes back to the functional stack again, and the ordering of that. And what Myers-Briggs and we're essentially looking for is this person extroverting judging, or are they extroverted perceiving? And as Elaine was saying, we know that the two broad forms of judging are thinking and feeling, and the two broad forms of perceiving are sensing and intuition. So and looking at someone from the outside, we want to determine whether they are exhibiting, thinking or feeling or sensing or perceiving on the outside. And that's kind of what Myers-Briggs were looking at, is the extraversion of judging or perceiving.
Right. How you present first to the outside world. So if you're an introvert, then your judging or perceiving function is actually going to be going to be your secondary or your second function, your auxiliary function. Yep. Not your dominant function.
Right. And this is a common point of confusion that we're going to get into later in our talk, and often leads to introverts mistyping on the JP preference. And this is something that we've really hammered home and that I've discussed quite a bit in my books, especially in My True Type. And it's also something we've tried to address with our type clarifier tests to help IN types in particular determine whether they're an INP or an INJ. So
yeah, it's kind of a sticky topic because for introverts in particular, what they present to the outside world, others around them may be able to identify very quickly that they come off as perceivers or judgers. For me, it was told to me often, and I knew right away that I was a judger from a pretty young age.
Even those unfamiliar with the system could call you a judger, maybe.
Right, opinionated, strong-minded, strong-willed. I make sure to let everybody know what I'm thinking or feeling.
So what you just described is those would be common manifestations of a judging of a judging type. Those who are showing a judging function to the outside world. You said someone who's direct,
right?
Maybe comes across strongly opinionated, knows what they believe. Maybe comes across as a little more closed or closed off, not open to. At least outwardly, not open to other interpretations or other ideas, maybe.
Right, but and then conversely, of course, you have IP types as as those who extrovert perceiving before they introvert perceiving. They to the rest of the world, they look like maybe they're not that they can be a little bit wishy-washy or I don't know, unlikely to finish things or lack some direction or conviction about something. But then when you mine the IP a little bit more, you find that no, they actually have inner convictions that are very strong or inward thoughts about things that are very strong, but the way that it comes across to the outside world is something quite different. And so then this is where that discrepancy comes in with respect to the testing for the JP difference, especially tests that try to test specifically for judging and perceiving versus testing for the functions. If you're testing specifically for that, I think there's this easy ability to conflate what you really are and what you aren't. If you're a dominant, if you're an IP and you're inwardly a dominant judger, you might respond with answers that would suggest that you're a judger because that's actually what you're leading with.
I think we should back up just a little bit, though. We've talked about I mentioned a couple of the characteristics of the judger, and so the perceiver is going to be naturally the opposite of that. They're going to come across as more receptive, adaptable, go with the flow. Sometimes described as spontaneous as well. So those would, if you take the original Myers-Briggs test, those are some of the items that you'll see on there. Do you like to plan things? If you say yes, that would count toward the J score. If you like to
fly by the seat of
your pants, that would go toward the P score. Sometimes judging is described as a tendency to move toward closure, and it's also sometimes described in terms of making decisions or evaluating things. So the essence of judging is wanting to come to a conclusion about it, or making a decision about something that's firm and convergent, essentially.
Yeah, they kind of deduce things, to take information and deduct something, or come toward a point of conversion or decision making or closure on something.
Exactly. Whereas the essence of perceiving, you often hear perceiving described in terms of keeping your options open, or is sort of not coming to a hard conclusion about something in order maybe to take in more information, or to leave things open so that maybe you can
to gain experience,
or so to leave it open so that you can be spontaneous in the moment, say respond to the situation or to your own feelings about the situation, make a decision on the fly rather than trying to plan everything way in advance, which for perceiving types can kind of take some of the fun out of it, which is being spontaneous, maybe coming across a random person or coffee shop that you want to visit, rather than saying, we're just going to go here
everything
or go there.
has to go according to a schedule.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the, as we said earlier, one of the main points of mistyping these days, and has been for a long time really, is happens to occur with introverts, because for introverts the extroverted function comes second. It's in the auxiliary position, because every introvert's dominant function happens to be introverted, which is what, according to Jung, makes them introverted in the first place. So what we end up with then is, for every IP type actually leads with a judging function. Their dominant function is judging. So in the case of an ITP type, for instance, they are leading with introverted thinking, which is thinking is one of the judging functions. But their auxiliary function is either extroverted sensing or extroverted intuition, both of which are perceiving functions. And we talk about this a lot on the blog. I have a post called Rethinking IPs, or Rethinking Judging and Perceiving in IPs and IJs, which you can look at, and it kind of goes through all of this and spells it out. It's also spelled out in my book, My True Type, as well.
And just to clarify, in case there was a question about this, when we refer to judging, that refers only either to thinking or feeling. If you're using a judging trait, then you're either using thinking or feeling, and if you're using, perceiving, you're only either using intuition or sensing. Those are the two options.
Exactly, and remember. And see, this is where it just gets difficult to talk about it. And actually, I've kind of made it a habit of using the notion of inner J versus outer J, or inner P versus outer P. Now, Myers-Briggs was mainly concerned with the outer P and the outer J, as we talked about earlier. I think the website Socionics was one of the originators of the idea that, I think they actually have termed, they've actually switched their labels so that, for instance, an INTP is actually an INTJ in the Socionics conception, which kind of reflects what we're talking about here, but
let's not confuse readers by going down that path, like sticking with the traditional type, types.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to start switching the names of the types. But
to clarify, if you're an IP, then you're either using introverted thinking as your dominant function or introverted feeling as your dominant. Those are the only two choices if you're an IP type of some sort. You're either using introverted thinking or introverted feeling. And for introverted judging, you're either using, your dominant function is either introverted intuition or introverted sensing. Those are the only two choices if you're an IJ.
If you're an IJ.
Right.
And so so if you're not familiar with the terminology, you're probably already confused and going on to listen to ESPN or something like that at this point. But or if you're Elaine, you'd be turning on the Olympics. But anyway, but this is a really kind of important matter to talk about, I think, because as I've said, it is a point of confusion, and so I think we should probably talk about a little bit what some of the manifestations of being an inner judger are, or an inner perceiver. Now this is not cut and dried, because with an inner with say an INP type, you're going to get some combination of J and P traits, because the INP is extroverting, perceiving, but inwardly, as we've said, they're inwardly judging, and so that's where the confusion arises. But we've noticed that IPs are often characterized as kind of having a strong sense of inner control. They're often self-motivated, self-starters. Sometimes I've called them inner control freaks, and that's the influence of that inner J function. They can also get impatient with prolonged perceiving. I, for instance, as an INTP, am less apt to be content watching the Olympics all day, where Elaine, who leads with a perceiving function as an INFJ, leads with, it happens to be an introverted perceiving function, but nonetheless, it's still leading with perceiving, and so there's a greater tolerance there for prolonged perceiving, whether it's browsing the internet or other things, or whereas as an inner judger, I'm more I want to get something done, or I want to work on something, or I want to this sort of mindset. I can get a little impatient with too much perceiving activities. And that's not to set ourselves up as the examples in this respect. I know there's some variation there, and I do think that environmental variables, like maybe even birth order or other factors, can play into one's degree of inner motivation or inner self-control. But part of the observation here is simply from a theoretical standpoint that if you are leading with a judging function, regardless of whether it's introverted or extroverted, there's still going to be IP or EJ. There's still going to be some influence from leading with a judging function that's going to look different than what it does leading with a perceiving function. And that's why, like in my book, My True Type, I've actually kind of, in some respects, compared the IP type and the EJ type, because in both cases we're leading with a judging function, and we're going to see some overlap with regard to certain variables, and such as maybe wanting to be a go-getter or something like that, compared to wanting to sit back and perceive and wait for something to happen, for instance. What have been some of your observations in this respect, Elaine?
Well, I can speak to my personal experience as an IJ, certainly, that I feel like I have, especially toward the beginning of the day and the end of the day, I have a hard time with that same kind of get up and go. A lot of the IPs I know and EJs have a very goal-oriented mindset first thing in the morning, and they don't want to be idle. They want to get up, get their cup of coffee, hit the ground running, and feel like they have a purpose to their day.
That's a good point. I noticed not that a lot of we know a lot of INFPs who they may enjoy coffee and talk a little bit, but then it isn't long before they want to go out for a run, go out for a walk with their children, or
going on work.
Like activity. There's almost a desire for activity or something that.
Well, and any of the, mind you, especially S types, also, even if you're, ESPs and others, thrive on activity and things to do. But I would say that there's something that differentiates them is this kind of goal. They often really like having a task list and a checklist, and they like to see these items being checked off, through the day or through the week or whatever it is, and that allows them to complete that cycle of like starting the day as a judger, maybe moving into perceiving, since that represents the middle of the stack, and then ending out the day with some sort of like closure or sense of accomplishment, and then also being ready to like know what they're going to do the next day to, you know, kind of continue toward these goals. Whereas like as a perceiver, you know, I feel a lot more comfortable being flexible about starting to take the day as it comes, and then maybe what inspires me, what do I want to write about today, and let that kind of sink in. And, you know, as something else, as I perceive the need to be a judger, that's kind of how it works, ironically. So as a perceiver, as I perceive the need to judge, you know, I will move into judging, and I too can have that sort of, you know, accomplishment minded, you know, tendency, like once I'm moving into the middle of the functional stack, but then again by the end of the day I'm ready for like my glass of wine and to relax and call it a day.
This is kind of an original theory on your part that I borrowed it for the book My True Type, which is what Elaine is referring to. Is she thinks of the functional stack almost as something that you'll move through sequentially throughout the day. So the types that lead with a judging function will start off first thing and kind of want to get into the judging element, and then maybe toward the middle of the day they'll move into more perceiving activities because the perceiving functions are in the middle of their functional stack, and then maybe toward the end back into judging, kind of finish out with judging. And it would be the opposite for the types leading with perceiving. And so what it sounds like is you're saying that for types that lead with a perceiving function, there's almost like, you know, you're starting with perceiving, so there's a period of waiting, of receiving, of almost like waiting for inspiration or direction to kind of move you.
Well, yeah, you're like a crouching tiger. I mean, just like kind of waiting for the right opportunity to like, you know, the right prey to come across your path. And then when you, as this is, you know, me speaking as a perceiver, and then when you see it, you like, the judging part definitely comes in, and you jump and you kind of go all in on that one kill or that one activity, and then you're like, and I'm done for the day. So there's a like, I would say less of a lingering over the J task. You know, it's like preparing yourself the best way you can to like make that J task be as efficient and like, you know, streamlined as possible, so that you can go back to perceiving and not, you know, and not have to be in that action mode. Whereas, and it looks very different. Like I would say this is where you kind of have, you know, these character traits of, you know, the dominant perceiver looks at the dominant judger and, you know, and maybe says like, my gosh, like they never know how to relax or how to take a break or take a vacation, or, you know, they're just always busy,
basically
busy.
You're saying neither IPs nor EJs are good at just
relaxing and waiting. Yeah, they being idle for too long begins to feel really uncomfortable for them. It's just not their natural. A state of rest for them looks like a state of unrest because they need to be knowing that they're going to be somehow moving toward some kind of a purpose or goal or activity that, you know, that brings some kind of closure or brings some sort of end game. Like, but just sitting and resting or kind of waiting is not their forte.
Mm-hmm.
I would necessarily say, yeah.
But we've also talked about how, you know, IPs, as you say, can sometimes have to-do lists, or we want to get things accomplished. And, you know, I personally like to think back over my day and think about the things that I've accomplished. And
you do that?
Well, sometimes. Or, you know, I wake up in the morning and I kind of have an idea, you know, I'd like to write a blog post today, and so it may not be long before I'm hard at work on that. And however, you've also made a good point in our conversations about how, despite, you know, IP's seeming, you know, busyness, sometimes they're not always effective in it's not always an efficient manner in which things get done.
Right.
And so even though the IJ is leading with perception, there's a certain efficiency that happens once
the jaying gets going.
Once the jaying gets started, and you may end up accomplishing as much as the IP. It just looks kind of differently. The IP is maybe bouncing back between different tasks and oscillating between things, and is maybe spending time and
Well, I mean, I think of it as like two people, two separate individuals getting ready to take a trip, and they have the same starting point and the same end point. Like I'm trying to get from point A to point B, and the difference between the dominant perceiver and dominant judger can be summed up sort of like the dominant judger, be it the IP or the EJ, is the second they get up and think about the fact that they have to get from A to B, they're planning. They're getting out their maps. They're looking at what they might need to do here. They're figuring out the different routes they could take, and they're very much on top of that. And then they head out, and as they go, though, they might, oh, this looks like the right turn. Let's make it here, but let's maybe go this way also. And then there's this sort of indirect, as they're journeying, this more indirect, like they get distracted, they make a pit stop, they go, here backwards then forwards until they finally reach the end, the point B. And but then when you look at the dominant perceiver, like the IJ or the EP, they're not like running out the door first thing to get from point A to B. They might wait, and it's a tortoise and hare story here. They might wait and kind of well, now we're ready to go. And once they go, they take the most direct route to get there, but it's probably all said and done happened basically the same amount of time when you consider how much time was kind of dilly-dallied at the front end if you're a perceiver versus in the middle if you're a judger.
And we've also talked about how that creates or it stems from almost a different shape in the functional stacks, where the IPs and EJs and leading with a J function, you can start to think of that as starting with a point, and then when they move through the functional stack into the auxiliary and tertiary perceiving functions, there's a broadening there. There's an expansion because perceiving is open. So they're moving from a point to almost diverging into openness in their auxiliary and tertiary functions before moving back to a J function in the inferior position. So it's like it ends up kind of looking like a diamond shape if you start with a point and then flare out and then come back down. Whereas with the IJ and the EPs, they're leading with perceiving, so there's an open starting point, and as they move into the auxiliary and tertiary judging functions, that brings them to a point of convergence, like that straight line like you were talking about, and then they flare back out toward perceiving with the inferior function, so that creates more of an hourglass shape to the functional stack.
Right. All considered, I would say that the amount of time, they probably actually accomplish almost as much over the course of a day or their lifetimes or whatever. But the manner in which they do it, looks different. And like I said, for me, at least as an IJ, when I get to that point of J'ing, I usually act very quickly. I want to hammer out the work, as quickly as possible so that I can get back to being a perceiver, which is my more comfortable state of rest.
I know we just threw a lot at you in a relatively short period of time here. It can definitely be difficult to sort out some of the IJ, IP issues. I think it's sometimes easier to do it on paper, which is why I included all of this information in my book, My True Type. And if you're having trouble with knowing whether you're a J or a P type, we have created our type clarifier test for INFJs and INFPs, as well as for INTJs and INTPs. There may be more to come in the future, but for right now, those are the two kind of clarifier tests that we offer. So I would encourage you to visit personalityjunkie.com, where all of this information is available. I do think that it's important to know whether you're truly an IP or an IJ, because so many other things are dependent on that understanding, like which function you're using. And if you're mistaken about which functions you're using, you're going to be going down the wrong paths as far as both understanding yourself and maybe understanding the types of
a more authentic path.
A more authentic path, yeah, the types of careers you should be pursuing. So I know there's a lot of technicalities and details that we threw at you today. But it is possible to come to a sort of a J conclusion, a proper diagnosis for your type. And so I just encourage you to keep learning about the functions, learn about the material that we've presented online and in our books, and eventually you'll get there. You just got to be patient, and I do think that it's worth it, and that knowing your true type will ultimately really make a difference in your life. If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to support it, you can do so in several ways. In addition to purchasing our books and personality tests, you can contribute through the support page on Personality Junkie. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution, you can do so through our Patreon page, which we link to in the footer of our website. Patreon supporters can enjoy a variety of benefits, such as access to unpublished material, complimentary copies of our upcoming books, as well as input on post and podcast topics. Your contributions make it possible for us to continue to provide quality posts and podcasts. Thank you for your support.